Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about the top 5 best infantry civilizations in AoE 2. Before I get started in the video, definitely check out my gameplay channel, Hera Gameplay on YouTube. A link in the description if you want to check out some pro gameplay. Otherwise, come check me out on Twitch as well. Link also in the description. But anyways, let's go ahead and hop right into the video. So starting off at number 5 here, we've got Japanese. Japanese are a classic, strong infantry civilization. They've been with us since the start of the game pretty much, and they've always had solid infantry, and I think more so these days as well, since they've got a few buffs lately. The thing about the Japanese is they've got good infantry at all stages of the game, which is a really big factor for this kind of list, because I'm not just thinking who's got the best infantry in late game, I'm also thinking who can make infantry viable at all stages of the game. And Japanese is definitely a good candidate for that. You've got a really good early militia rush or man-at-arm rush because of your good economy, and then having that faster attacking infantry kick in from feudal age is really strong, especially with the men-at-arm rush. You can absolutely destroy a wood line. Not only that though, but going in towards the late game, you've got fully upgraded champions with gambesons. You've also got halberdiers and samurai going into elite samurai, of course, which all attack faster, and that's a really strong bonus in the late game. In fact, especially for Japanese halberdier, attacking faster is a really big factor because it allows you to implement the attack bonus more often, or lets you put the attack bonus on your opponents more often, which makes the halberdiers incredibly strong versus any kind of cavalry. So in my opinion, no matter what you're going up against with the Japanese, unless it's like archers or range units, you should be completely fine destroying them with infantry. Mix of halb champion, mix of halb samurai, or just pure champs or samurai usually does a great job in mid-late game. Moving on to number 4, and this is going to come at a bit of a surprise here, we've got the Goths. Now, the Goths are a great infantry civilization, and for many of you, they are considered the best infantry civilization. And to some degree, I kind of agree with that, but at the same time, Goths don't actually have the strongest infantry at different stages of the game. Other infantry civs actually destroy Goths, especially in the late game, and usually Goths can't really go infantry against them in the mid game either. And so while Goths do have a good transition with infantry from Dark Age, they can go for cheaper militia. Same thing in feudal age with men-at-arms that come a little cheaper, and they have the faster working barracks throughout the entire game. Going into late game, they only really destroy civs that don't have great infantry. Like for example, if they're up against any archer civ, then their Huskarls will definitely carry. If they're up against cavalry archer or cavalry civs, then a mix of Huskarls and halbs definitely do the trick. And then against most civs, a mix of champions, halberdiers, and Huskarls usually is a good idea. They also have strong mid-game rushes with longswords, Huskarls, pikes. A good mix of those can obviously be very strong. That being said though, their ultimate weakness is going up against the top tier infantry civs in late game, and they just simply can't make use of their own infantry against them because they just simply lose way too fast. So even though Goths can spam, and the 210 pop Goth infantry spam late game is definitely solid, it doesn't quite compare against some of the other late games when it comes to powerful infantry civs. But still, number 4 for Goths is no small task, and that's definitely a solid spot on the list. Moving on to number 3, we've got a recently buffed civs, the Incas. The Incas are a fantastic infantry civ, but not in the traditional way. They actually don't get supplies nor gambesons, but the recent buff making all their food units cheaper applies heavily to their infantry line. Incas also get access to some unique units like Eagle Warriors and Kamyuks, and those are extremely powerful, especially when combining it with their unique tech. I see Incas as a powerhouse infantry civ in the late game. Mass Kamyuks can absolutely destroy any melee unit. It's one of the most powerful units in the game, especially with how cheap it is these days. If you're up against any range unit, then their Eagle Warrior becomes a very strong option. So no matter what you're playing up against, as long as it's not something strictly anti-infantry like hand cannoneer or something like that, then Incas will have a great option when it comes to their infantry lines. They also get fully upgraded champion minus gambesons and obviously supplies, but the discount still applies heavily to them. And then even in the early game, you do get cheaper Eagle Warriors and cheaper champion line plus cheaper halb line. So they have a good option, or good options in terms of infantry throughout the entire game, and their Eagle Rush and Castle Age is no joke. And like I said, going into late game, they've got a ton of super powerful options, definitely deserving of a number 3 slot. Alright, moving on to number 2, we've got the Slavs. The Slavs are an incredible civilization when it comes to infantry, and their recent buff definitely helps them go into infantry a little earlier in the game as well. Let's talk about their late game first. Slav late game in terms of infantry might be one of the strongest out there. Drushina is such an insane technology, and the only downside to it is just the fact that it's pretty expensive. However, it's insanely worth it. It makes your halberdier incredibly strong against pretty much any unit, but especially against mass cavalier or mass paladin, and especially against mass hussar. are, you absolutely destroy those things. But also with Drashina, Halberdier actually does very well against other infantry units or trash units. Like if you're playing Halberdier against Halberdier and skirms and you've got Drashina, your Halbs will actually destroy that kind of composition, and it costs you very little to make them since they're a non-gold costing unit. So with Drashina, your average unit like the Halberdier ends up being a very well-rounded unit just because the slash damage is so strong. You also can mix in champions with full upgrades including Gambesons, and then you also get free supplies and free Gambesons, and that's going to bring us into the early game, and this helps out a lot. Going men-at-arms with Slavs in Feudal Age and then mixing in a couple more is definitely a viable option. Going for a heavy longsword rush in Castle Age is definitely a great option as well because you get supplies and Gambesons for free, and if you drop 3 barracks, they also count as houses, giving you 5 extra population space. So you can see that an all-in push with like longswords or pike longsword and siege with the Slavs can actually be a great strategy, and it's definitely a very viable infantry approach in the mid game. Moving on to number 1, but actually before we do that, let's go ahead and check out their honorable mentions. And this one I have just for the Viper as well here. We've got the Dravidians, but hold on, it's not because of the Rumi swordsmen, so don't talk about any of that. But the Dravidians are actually a great infantry civilization. Having the cheaper upgrades on their champion line, it definitely makes for a smooth transition throughout the game. You can go for a strong men-at-arm rush, of course, with the discounted men-at-arm tech, and then you also get discounted supplies and Gambesons, plus discounted pretty much everything from the barracks, which is a really strong bonus and something definitely that helps you throughout the game. But the main thing that makes Dravidians so strong in the late game is their tech Wood Steel. This makes their infantry incredibly powerful, and it's very similar to the Slavs where it makes their Halberdier good against pretty much everything because it gives you at least +3 attack, as the standard unit in late game has minimum 3 armor, assuming it's fully upgraded. But of course, in some crazy scenarios like up against Bulgarians with their two-handed swordsmen with crazy armor, suddenly your champions for the Dravidians, ignoring all that armor, you just absolutely destroy them. Similarly, Dravidians versus Teutonic Knights or just 2 champs in general, Dravidians will absolutely destroy them, and so on and so forth. You've got a ton of options, and that Wood Steel is really, really strong. A couple other honorable mentions is Burmese. Getting +3 attack on all their infantry is pretty solid. Also, just from Feudal Age, getting that +1 right away is pretty good too. So Burmese is quite solid in that regard as well. And then of course Vikings getting extra HP, and the Chieftain tech makes their infantry quite solid throughout the entire game. But honestly, Burmese and Vikings are a little lackluster compared to some of the other civs on this list. I definitely have Dravidians at number 6, for example. Alright, now talking about number 1, this civ will cost you $14 to play, but honestly, the Romans are the best infantry civilization in the game right now. I actually thought about this quite a bit, and I came to the conclusion that Romans can use infantry better at all stages of the game compared to these other civilizations. I haven't done extensive testing, so I could be wrong on this, but from my limited experience, the Romans feel absolutely insane when it comes to their infantry play. For example, in the Feudal Age, you can actually go men-at-arm rush and then drop down a quick, I've got a sub here real quick, thank you for the sub, that came in during the video, respect though, and yeah. So like the Romans, you can go for a men-at-arm rush, you can get cheap infantry armor right away, so it only costs 100 food, make a blacksmith, pick that up, and that counts as +2 armor for both melee and range. That is insane. If you get that and you go to opponent's woodline with men-at-arms with +2/+2 armor, the opponent's vills will do 1 damage, virtually unkillable. Your opponent's scouts will do 2 less damage, making them deal 3 damage. That's very, very low. And so you can see real quick how strong the men-at-arms are if you just go for that early blacksmith and that extra little bit of armor. Not to mention that your opponent's archers will also deal only 1 damage to the men-at-arms until they get fletching, in which they'll deal 2, because the men-at-arm has 1 base pierce armor, +2 makes for 3. And so these men-at-arms for the Romans are so strong in Feudal Age, and in my opinion, it's probably the strategy you should go for almost every single time with the civilization. If you have any chance to do damage, definitely the men-at-arms is a great choice. Not only that though, but going into the Castle Age, longswords with extra armor are also insane, and I highly recommend you go for longsword and siege push as well, because that's going to make the Romans a force to be reckoned with. And then going on into late game, you've got the Legionary, which is just a one-time upgrade from longswords straight to your final unit. You don't have to go two-handed swordsman and then Legionary. You just go straight into that, which is obviously saving you a lot of time and resources. And the Legionary has incredible stats. You obviously don't get the last armor with the Romans, but that doesn't really matter because both your armor upgrades are counting twice, so you end up actually being stronger than a generic champion by far. And then the last thing, the cherry on top, is that if you combine the Centurion, which is an OP unique unit for the Romans, with the Legionary, it actually gives them an attack speed buff and a movement speed buff, which makes that unit just incredible. So the late game comp for Romans with infantry should just be an absolute powerhouse and should dominate most other infantry civilizations in the game, save maybe like Teutonic Knights or something random like that. But anyways, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and as always, make sure to like, comment, subscribe if you want to help me out with the algorithm or whatnot, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.